Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Autistic Prophet. My husband will be accompanying by singing in the background, and I'll be giving a speech on the moral principle of might makes right. It will be an odd coincidence if the regime in power were always a regime of justice. If we automatically assume power and justice always coincide, we are guilty of might makes right thinking. Might makes right thinking is the foundation of the world. No one in commerce asks questions like, is the distribution of ownership enforced by the state just? If you ask that kind of question, people will laugh. If you bring up this question in your 9 a.m. meeting, and in commerce, it is just assumed that whatever system is in power is the right system. Our job is to put our knowledge in service to the aims dictated by this system, not to question the aims of this system, even when the system is destroying the planet. Thinking critically about the history and effect of the system is out of scope of thinking required for work for the system. It's not welcome on the factory floor. Critical thinking is not welcome on the factory floor. Now, the work of a sociologist or a philosopher might include a little bit of critical thinking, but in commerce, this scope of thinking is confined to thinking about how do we carry out the aims dictated by this system. Questions about whether the aims dictated by the system have positive effects in the world, such questions are out of bounds. That's irrelevant. It's a waste of time. Within the commercial world, the might makes right philosophy is just assumed. I mean, to question it is a joke. It's just a waste of time. In philosophy, they call it a non sequitur. It does not follow. Now, of course, people have rationalizations for why might makes right. This particular empire is both mighty and spreading democracy. Oh, what a convenient coincidence that might and right coincide at this one point in history. Well, this is silly. These kinds of statements do not withstand even a moment of scrutiny, but they get no scrutiny. The purpose of statements like this is to shut down critical thinking, not to begin a critical dialogue. The true meaning of such statements is shut up, focus on carrying out the tasks that the mighty system demands. For the purpose of silencing critical thinking, any flimsy rationalization will do. All it needs is an air of finality. If, for example, you work on the factory floor of a manufacturer of weapons, you will hear things like, the military is keeping freedom safe. This is not intended to begin a conversation about the question, is the military keeping people safe? Or is it attacking vulnerable societies that are not falling in line with the agenda of imperialism? No. The purpose of statements like this is just to translate might makes right into another language. So the language of acquiescence is not a language of critical thought. It speaks to silence thought, not to begin a line of investigation. There is no second step in the dialogue. No second step is wanted. What is wanted is acquiescence. Whatever language you hear on the factory floor, it always reduces to this message, this same message. Everyone here accepts that might makes right. That's what we signed up for in being born in a culture of acquiescence. Now shut up with your critical thinking bullshit, Peter, and just accept, like everyone else, you are just wasting time. Might makes right. What we are doing is right because we are serving the system in power, which must be right because it must be the right system because it's a system in power. Might makes right. Stop criticizing and complaining. Get back to work. We must acquiesce to survive. Now keep destroying the planet. Now, I admit we must acquiesce to survive, but the kind of acquiescence we need to survive is only superficial acquiescence. Our hearts don't need to join the chorus of might makes right. I know everyone hates it when I talk about religion, but religion has the perfect way of describing the might makes right philosophy. It is beast worship. The famous 13th chapter of John's Apocalypse, the last book of the New Testament, has the most apt way of describing it. The people say, worship the beast. Who can fight against it? In artistic depictions, the beast is always shown wielding the scepter of power. the beast is sovereign, state, king, archon, ruler, legislator, magistrate, court, prince, system, plutocrat, dollar, law, corporation, line manager, whatever or whoever is in power. We bow down and worship the power we acquiesce to. We say, worship the beast. Who can fight against it? Might makes right. The flesh must acquiesce. There's really no escaping that. But the mind does not have to acquiesce. That is a different matter entirely. And those people who do acquiesce in the mind and not just in the flesh, they take their acquiescence too far. There is a better way. The flesh must acquiesce to survive. The mind does not have to acquiesce to survive. The existence of writings that refuse to uphold the might makes right philosophy is proof that the mind can be free. In a regime with superficially persuasive democratic procedures, might makes right has a different translation. In such regimes, might makes right is translated as, if you don't like it, you can vote. Then the next logical question is, if this were a dialogue, would be, can my vote change the things I care about? The answer, of course, is no. Both parties accept campaign contributions, which I call bribes, from the oil and coal companies and weapons manufacturers and profitable private prisons. Your vote will not change anything. If you don't like it, you can vote is just another way of saying might makes right. The oligarchs give you a choice between two pretty faces to explain their decisions to you. That's the system in power. That's the amount of power you get. Just accept it. It must be right. Might makes right. Ask the question, does the system claim to be democratic because it intends to be democratic? Or does the system claim to be democratic to get us to acquiesce? To ask a question like that, to ask if the system is democratic in fact and not merely in its official dispatches, or any form of questioning or critical thinking, it's just a waste of time. Get back to work, Peter. Obey. Might makes right. Now, the archon, and I gave a list before of what is the archon, the law, money, power. Just lump all that under the term archon. Archon is a Greek word. It means ruler. It's the root of a lot of words, including monarch, including anarchy. Now, the archon does not like the idea that there is a part of the mind that does not acquiesce to him and his system. The archon does not like that. The archon doesn't like the idea that you might want something more than to select among two or three choices that he has approved for you in advance. So the archon will make sure you laugh at these kinds of writings, like we talked about John of Patmos, about beast worship, writings that criticize the archon and his system instead of acquiescing. The archon doesn't like that. I mean, that's why they martyred some of these early thinkers before the whole thing got taken over by Constantine. That is another story. So the statement, "we live in a democracy," is not intended as an assertion of fact. It's not that kind of statement. It is a statement that might makes right. It's a propaganda. The statement refers to two things: the regime in power and democracy. And it would be an odd coincidence if these two things coincided. If the regime in power was what its propaganda claimed it was, if the socialist regime was genuinely socialist, if the democratic regime was genuinely democratic, it would be an odd coincidence if this were the case, if might and right coincided. And every time we acquiesce to propaganda of the sovereign, whatever it is, we acquiesce that might makes right. And the archon doesn't like the idea that there is a part of the mind that does not acquiesce to him and his system. That part of the mind is wasting mental energy that might have been directed to serving him and his system. The archon doesn't like for you to question that might is right, that power is just, that the state is democratic. The archon wants you to obey and ask no questions. So the archon gives you a whole panoply of conversation stoppers to shut down any critical thinking. This regime is a democracy. You get a chance to vote. This statement is not intended to begin a discussion of whether the candidates accept bribes, whether this bribery might impair the truth of the claim that we live in a democracy. No, this claim is not intended to begin a discussion. This claim doesn't derive its motivation or its justification from empirical evidence at all. It is an ideological claim. It is a propagandum, which is the singular of propaganda, of the archon. Might makes right. Whoever is in control of wealth deserves this control. Whoever has power merits power. Might makes right. So those who question the idea that might makes right always do so from a standpoint discredited beforehand by our refusal to acquiesce. The refusal to acquiesce marks a mind as recalcitrant, and when the system thrives on acquiescence, critical thinking is a hindrance. So the ant wanders away from the ant colony and begins to question whether the role assigned to him by history and biology is right. Does that make him a defective ant? The mighty forces of history put me in my place, and those who acquiesce to the forces of history are mindless automatons, ants in the colony, silencing critical thought, chanting in unison, might makes right. But there is a better way. We have to acquiesce in the flesh, but in the mind, we do not have to acquiesce that might makes right. There is a better way. Thank you for your support and attention.